Yep, of course.
Okay, hello everybody. You're welcome to this plenary session on seeking job change after 50, and it's how the job market undermines older job seekers. So we have two excellent speakers. We have Matt Flynn, and he'll be the discussant will be Madonna Harrington-Meyer, and Matt's going to speak for 40 minutes or so. And Madonna is going to speak for 10, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers. My name is Anya Lema, and I'm Deputy Director here at the Irish Centre for Social Gerontology. So it's great to see everybody here. So just a little bit about Matt. So he is Professor of Work and Employment at the University of Leicester Business School and Director of the Centre for Research on the Older Workforce. And he's carried out a lot of research projects, both with the European Union and the UK and Hong Kong as well. And he has produced good practice guides for employers and several articles and co-edited books and so on. So without further ado, I'll let Matt introduce his paper.
Thank you so much. How do I turn off this one? If I have this one on, so I don't have. Do I turn it off this way? Or?
I think so.
Yeah. All right. Everybody can hear me? Yes, I can shout if necessary. Well, first of all, thank you to Anya and to Kieran and Alba and Christine and everybody who invited me to the session today. I always like being on the after lunch special. Usually I hope that there's wine being served, so if people start to fall asleep, I can blame the wine rather than blame myself. But I think this time, if people are nodding off, I'll have to blame myself. So as Anya mentioned, I am at the University of Leicester in the UK. You can tell from my accent. And I've been working on older workforce issues for quite a while. My first job after getting my PhD, I know there are a couple of PhD students in the room. By the way, when I finished my PhD, it took me about 8 years to complete my PhD, and after about year 7, people would ask me how I'm doing, and I would tell people that I was about in the middle of the class because half of the students graduated years and years ago and the other half gave up, so I was the only one who was persevering on. So if you do find yourself ever struggling, don't worry about it. It comes with the territory. I'm keeping the slide up with my contact details just for a few moments. So if you want to contact me, one thing that's missing is my email address, which is just matt.flynn@leicester.ac.uk. But you can, of course, use social media as well. Anya knows that in a cost action program that we're both involved in, I keep pushing the idea of Mastodon. And Mastodon is an alternative to Twitter or X or whatever the heck they're calling it right now. So please do if you want to find me anywhere, then please find me there. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the experiences of people making a midlife career change. And this seems to be the area which is a little bit more complex and a little bit more troublesome when it comes to aging workforces. Usually when we're talking about ways that older workers can stay in work a little bit longer, the first go-to point is what can employers do? What can your employer do to support you in extending your working life? So if there's a physical limitation that you might have, maybe changes to your desk, maybe changes to your work environment. If you need a little bit of training, then your employer can offer that as well. There are various interventions that employers can provide, but what if you're in a situation where the job that you're doing isn't really conducive to staying in work longer, and you can't rely on your employer to help you make the leap to somewhere else because that somewhere else might not be with the employer? And who can help in making that job transition? Now, just putting into the context, This is from a survey that I did with some colleagues in Hong Kong a couple of years back. It's a little bit dated. It's from 2014, but I think the message is fairly clear. We asked participants of the survey, people between the ages of 50 and 60, when they were planning to retire. We also asked about family income, not personal income, but family income. And you can see there that when it comes to planned retirement ages, when people say that they're going to retire, there's an inverse relationship between family income and planned retirement age. In other words, people who are living in families with the lowest income are planning to retire latest, or they're not planning to retire at all. And that sends a very clear message, at least in the UK, that people are working to live rather than living to work. And if people are going to be, especially low-income people, going to be working longer, then an infrastructure needs to be in place to support them in finding work which is conducive to longer working lives. And there are clear reasons why they should be doing so. The UK, like most parts of the world, are facing very big labor and skills shortages. And there's a lot of debate about ways in which employers can find people with the right skills. Well, there's also a large number of people who are out of work, not because because they're retired. They might say they're retired, but they might not really consider themselves retired, and want to find ways to stay, to get back into the job market. So about a third of the 55 to 64 group are out of work, and about 28% of those who are out of work say that they'd like to return to work if they can find work which matches their lifestyles, which matches their capabilities, and which would be conducive to a longer working life. At the same time, about 3/4 of employers say that they have skills and labor shortages. So there's a real, I'm not an economist, but there seems to be a fairly clear supply and demand message in those figures. So what is the experiences of people in the job market? Well, a couple of years ago, I did some interviews with older workers who had made a career change after the age of 50, and looked at their experiences. And there were two guys that I talked to who seemed to be, if you just looked at their demographics, seemed to be in a fairly similar situation. They were both skilled guys in the finance sector who, after the age of 50, had made a job change. But they were very different experiences. The first guy, his name, the pseudonym we used was Abe, talked about how he had been running a major hedge fund. It was very stressful. He got a lot of money out of it. He had a very good pension and so forth. He retired in his early 50s, and he found that retirement wasn't really something that he enjoyed very much. So what did he do? Well, he just went onto the high street, and he walked up and down the high street to job centers and asking, are there any jobs which are available? I'll try pretty much anything. And what he experienced was at first fairly negative. As he talked about going to a job center and somebody looked at him, sort of in their mind, I'm sure they didn't say this out loud, but what do you want, you old fogey? But he persevered, and he finally got a job, an administrative job, which suited him very well. It was actually in the university that I was working at the time. It was matching what he wanted. It wasn't terribly stressful. It had him engaged in research that he was very interested in, and he felt like he was making a positive contribution. So it's a very positive experience, and it was an experience based on his perseverance in finding the job that he wanted. I have a second person who's a stock trader around the age of 51. He wasn't he wasn't dismissed, but he jumped before he was pushed out of the job. He recognized the fact that that everybody who was working around him was about 20 or so years younger than him. He thought, well, this is a young man's game, and therefore now's my time to go. So he had he got an early retirement offer. It seemed to be pretty good for him, and he made the jump. The problem that he had was when he made the jump, he didn't know what he was jumping into. It was jumping into the abyss. So he was planning his retirement. He couldn't really afford to completely retire, but he didn't know what he was going to do next. And he ended up becoming a cab driver. And he absolutely, when he talked about being the cab driver, there was a lot of meaning and a lot of sense of purpose in the job. He told me all about the various celebrities he had in his back seat. He showed me the bat that he had in case a customer became a little bit rambunctious. And I thought that he really enjoyed his job, and he did enjoy his job, but he also had a lot of regret about things that he could have done if he had planned for what his second career would be, but then two, if he had gotten the support that he needed in order to make the leap into something else. So what are the experiences of older job seekers? Well, there are various penalties that many face. First is youth-centric recruitment policies and practices, not necessarily explicit practices. I remember a time in the UK where employers had age ranges, preferred age ranges in advertisements. That's, of course, no longer the case, but nevertheless, employers tend to favor young people for various reasons. They might consider their skills a little bit more recent. They might think that they're going to be a little bit more malleable and flexible when it comes to work, that maybe an older candidate might be a little bit set in their ways. Of course, not true, but these are still perceptions that many employers have. There are ageist assumptions that employers have as well, especially when it comes to salary expectation. I might offer this person the job, they're qualified for the job, but once they hear what the salary is, there's no way that they're going to take it, and therefore we're not going to have the conversation. There's a lack of training and a lack of accreditation, and sometimes a little bit of top-up training could really pay dividends for an older worker who is looking for work which matches the skills that they have. Is the issue of confidence as well, especially if there's a perception that employers are biased towards younger workers. And then finally, there's the visiting team advantage. When I'm talking about job change here, it's mostly in the context of making a career change, doing something completely different. University of Leicester is the fifth university, I'm 55, it's the fifth university that I've worked at. I started in 2022. Can't seem to hold down a job. But each job change that I made was relatively easy from one to another because I knew how to walk the walk and I knew how to talk the talk, and I knew the language of academia, and I knew the people. Often I would talk to a dean, and we would know the same people in the same circles. If I tried to get a job in a private sector organization, I might struggle for a while. If I have a dream job, as I get closer to retirement, I might not be able to do that. And if I can't find another academic job, I might end up in a job which is well below the skills level that I have. And I might not be making as good of use of the experience that I have coming to wonderful conferences like this in remobilizing them to other types of work. And that has a really bad effect on job changers, especially people who are changing jobs and they end up in employment which doesn't match the skills and capabilities that they have. Doesn't have a good effect, obviously, on their salary because they're not earning as much as they would like, but it also has a very negative effect on their confidence. And there are various theories about whether going for an underemployed job for a 50-plus job seeker is a good strategy or not. Some who say, well, this isn't a good idea because you really should be going for the job that you're looking for. And there's a second approach which says, well, maybe if you start off within a job that is below what you want, you can work your way up the ladder and then finally get to the job that you're aspiring to. And I wanted to see whether this was true or not in some research that I did, which I'll talk about in a moment, with people who leave the armed forces after the age of 50. A major job change, going from not just from one type of job to another, but going from one job market to another. And as part of this research, we asked older vets, people who left the armed forces after the age of 50, we asked them two sets of questions. First, we asked them about their experiences in making that career transition. You left the military, you went for another job. First job, what was your experience in getting that job? And then we asked them about their jobs today. How do you feel about your work now? And for some people, that job transition happened 10, 15, 20 years ago. And we could see a very strong relationship between how they experienced that job transition and where they are today. So one of the questions that we asked when it came to their old job, their first job transition, did you go for a job which was well below your skills level? And those who said yes, they did, were much more likely to report that today, not 15 years ago, but today, they feel undervalued at work. They feel that their work is uninteresting. They're dissatisfied with their employment. And that sent a really strong message, which we brought back to the Ministry of Defense and other organizations that were part of the veteran support infrastructure, is that you have to make that get that transition right. Because if you don't get it right, then people might be on the bottom of that ladder and think that they can work their way up, but it's probably not going to be the case. We also did some interviews with some older veterans as well about their experiences in making that first transition. I've got a couple of videos, if they'll work. We tested it a moment ago. And this is a guy by the name of Steve. I really like Steve. Steve was... he had retired from the military at 52. He went through a number of different jobs during that time. Tried one thing, didn't quite work out, tried another thing, going back and forth. By the time I talked to him, he was a procurement manager for a major organization, and it made really good use of his skills because the skills that he had in terms of organizing troops in the military could be used for organizing the procurement and of various products that the organization could have. And he talked a little bit about his experience in that job market.
But it's sort of dropping the place both ways. As an ex-serviceman in my early days, it was like, I just need a job. Give me a job, I can do that job. You know, like the old guy on the Boys from the Black stuff. Give us a job, give us a job. It's got to be the right job for you, as in you've got to be interested in it. It's not just a job.
One of the other things that Steve mentioned to me is, the first jobs he ended up just going from one organization to another, asking for a job. And I asked him, well, why do you have this? Why do you think you had this experience? What was the thing that you felt at the time was going a little bit wrong? And he said, unfortunately, I didn't get this on tape, but he said, well, the real problem was nobody ever asked me the Spice Girl question. And of course, I'm not going to be cruel to everybody and not tell you what the Spice Girl question is. The Spice Girl question was that nobody asked him what he wanted, what he really, really wanted. And he said that if he did ever get that question, then it would have led him maybe a couple of steps closer to the job that he has now. Because being a procurement manager wasn't the foremost thing in his mind, but once he went through those number of different job changes, he realized that this was a job that would really suit him. So generally speaking, what do older job seekers want? What do they really want? Well, obviously they want to have a job which meets their basic needs. Doesn't necessarily mean that they want to become a millionaire. I mean, who wouldn't want to be a millionaire? But that's not the only factor there. They want to have some ability to maintain some autonomy over their lives. You know, having an income from being a teenager up until forever is something that everybody wants. They want the opportunity to learn and to grow and to find out new things. So the experiences of Abe, for example, is a good example of that. Being an administrator in a university setting meant that he could come to conferences like this and learn new things, even if it wasn't a requirement for the job. You want to be able to make friends and meet interesting people. And you want to have the ability to make a contribution to wider society. Now, all of these factors are intrinsic within the WHO healthy aging framework, and they apply as much to work as they do to anything else. One of the ways that we're trying to think about the issue of job change is to place it within the analytical framework of the capabilities approach. Many of you will be familiar with this face. It's Amartya Sen, who talked about ways in which people can have substantial freedoms over their lives, that they can live the life that they value, or in this case, they can find work which they value. So substantial freedoms come about when people have the resources to make use of the abilities and the skills and the knowledge which they have. And in the case of older job changers, to remobilize those skills into new things. And what do people need in order to make that leap? Well, one, they have to have some capabilities, and they have to have some skills and knowledge and intrinsic capabilities. But two, they also have to have some support in order to make that job transition. Somebody just asked me the other day what my dream job was as a child, and I used to watch the show The People's Court, and I used to always fancy myself as like a TV judge, kind of like Judge Judy today. And I think I do have some capabilities to do that. I think I have some, I can be very judgmental when I'd like to be. And I can come up with very pithy phrases like, stop peeing on my leg or whatever she says. But I don't have the skills for that. I don't have a law degree. Maybe if somebody offered me the opportunity to get a law degree, then I could have that capability. Maybe this would be a little bit more of a realistic jump. I might be a good consultant. I might be a good business consultant. I've been working in academia in human resource management for about 20-something years now, but I don't have good business contacts. Of course, writing an academic paper is a little bit different from writing a business report. So if I get those extra top-up skills, if somebody can provide it for me, maybe someday, I'm sure this is never going to be the case, but someday if I ever get sick of academia, I never will, but assuming that I did, maybe offering that little bit of extra skills could help me make the leap into something else. And the end result is capabilities. In other words, the ability the ownership, the autonomy, and the agency that one has over their career. Now, I'm doing some research now. We're just writing a paper with some colleagues in Japan comparing this issue of the capabilities approach and how it relates to older workers, older job changers in the UK and Japan. And it's a really interesting comparison because you have very different labor markets in the two contexts. The UK, like Ireland, like the United States, is an external labor market. You have very low levels of job security relative to other parts of the world. Employers, if an employer wants to find a way to fire you, they'll find a way to fire you. But on the other hand, there are opportunities for making midlife career changes. While the employers generally speaking are biased towards younger workers, there are still some opportunities for making job change. And in the UK, like Ireland, like the United States, we have age discrimination regulations which prohibit at least explicit forms of discrimination. A couple of years ago, we had something called the Midlife Career Review, which was a government-funded project to provide career advice to people after the age of 50, but generally speaking, this was something that was very low level. It was piloted, it was quite successful, but it didn't really amount to very much. Japan, you've got internal labor markets. In other words, once you start with an organization, your employer provides you a lot of career support, a lot of training, age-based pay systems, which I guess in our context would be fairly problematic, and pretty much a job for life. Well, a job up until retirement. In Japan, organizations have, for people in this, let me pronounce the name right, Shushin Koyo, employment contracts, in other words, lifetime employment contracts. You can have a retirement age anywhere between the ages of 60 and 65. However, that just means that your employment contract ends and your employer is obliged to offer you a second employment contract. And that new contract will probably be lower paid, it'll be fewer hours, it'll be lower level, but you still have the opportunity to stay and work pretty much as long as you'd like to. This is something called shuku and teien. Sometimes these jobs might be within the organization, sometimes they might be with a subsidiary. We want to show you how we do things our way so you'll replicate it, therefore we're sending this older manager over to teach you how to do that. Last thing to remember comparing the UK and Japan is that you have a lot of people who are outside of these types of employment contracts. About 20% of people in the UK, older people, people 50 plus, are in some form of non-standard work, casual work, zero-hour contracts, self-employment, and so forth. And about double that, 41% of Japanese workers are in what they call irregular employment contracts. And that figure is growing because you have a lot of younger people who have very few opportunities to get into these highly sought after jobs. So we wanted to look at, well, what's the difference between the experiences of people in the UK and Japan? In the UK, you can make a job change, but you're pretty much on your own. In Japan, your employer is probably going to provide you a lot of support in making that job change because they're, through regulations, required to do so. But you might find yourself in a job that really isn't really something that you want to be doing. So it's employment, but it's not employment that you value. So here are a couple of quotes coming from the UK. First one, not terribly surprising. From a career change perspective, making a job change after 50, I was just banging my head against a brick wall to find something that I wanted to do and somebody that would employ me to do that. And this can be the case no matter the skills level, no matter the education, and so forth. I talked to a lot of people, especially in the military work, people who looked at job specifications and said, I can tick every single one of these boxes. Why the heck wasn't I shortlisted for this job? And once you're not shortlisted for the first job, you might feel, well, why try for the second and the third? Second one was kind of an interesting example. The guy was he was a surveyor, and he was sick of, after the age of 50, he was kind of sick of sloshing around in the rain, looking at buildings which were about to fall down. And he got the idea, well, I could, what can I do that doesn't involve going out in the rain? And he thought, well, academia. So he thought, well, I know how to do this surveying work. Why don't I teach it? And he looked at the syllabus of the module that he wanted to teach, and he saw that the first book on the list of compulsory reading was something that he actually wrote. He had written it decades before. He looked it up on Amazon, and I'm sure many people in this room have this experience. You look at your book and it's going for 1,800 pounds, and you think, I must have said something really insightful there that people are going to pay 1,800 pounds for my book. So that was his selling point to the college. He said, listen, you can employ me and I can teach your students, or you can make them go out and pay 1,800 pounds and read what I wrote some years ago. Somebody who said that they valued them, that they were looking for a job, they couldn't find a job which matched what they wanted to do, and then they felt, I'm going to just retire because I value myself a little bit too much to go for a job which is below what I want to do. And then finally, somebody who said, and I'm sure we have all had these experiences as well, you're in a redundancy situation, you think, well, the person who's making people redundant is probably the person that should have been made redundant themselves. I just finished a head of department job, and that sort of rubbed me the wrong way when I heard that the first time. But fortunately, I never had to make a redundancy. What was the experience in Japan? We had somebody who had sort of what we would expect. They were at the age of 60. They had been, I think, an accountant, but they weren't a certified accountant, and they thought, well, I could make a little bit extra money if I get the certification. They went to their employer, and the employer provided it. It made sense to the employer because the employer thought, well, I'm going to have to keep this person one way or the other. I might as well keep them even more productive than they could have otherwise been. Therefore, the training made financial sense. You had somebody who's working in. We had somebody who's working in a bank. They reached their retirement age. They felt, I can still do the job. I'm still capable of doing the job. I'm probably the best person for the job. But they were pushed out. They were pushed to the side to make way for a younger worker. And they felt that this was really unfair. They still could work. They still got an income, but it didn't match what they wanted to do. And then we had somebody who was in that 41% irregular work, and they were a skilled tradesperson, but they were during a period of job attrition in the industry. They were pushed out of the work, and they ended up in a job, a low-skilled job, because they simply had no other choice. So what are some solutions? Well, this work that I did with veterans offered at least a pathway that I thought that's worth investigating in terms of providing that support so that people can have the jobs which they value. In the UK, generally speaking, although we wrote a report and we sort of picked holes at the support which is provided to veterans, it's actually not a bad service. When people leave the armed forces, they've got a pretty good level of support from the Ministry of Defense, not just the Ministry of Defense, but also from an organization called Career Transition Partnership. It provides training to veterans so that they can top up the skills that they have. And you have organizations like my university. University of Leicester is a member of the Armed Forces Covenant, which means that managers like I was for a little while, who are recruiting for a job, and they see that there's a veteran on the list, they offer them a guaranteed job interview because they recognize the fact that they might offer some really good skills to the organization, but it might not be apparent to those who have a sort of a narrow view of what a person would be, a good fit would be for a job. And we talked to one employer. and what their
very much
experiences
at
were
the,
with older veterans.
Managerial level that those people may have, but also certainly from an FDM perspective, where we found it's really worked very well has been in project management, and for the probably 50 plus into that program director space, where they're actually bringing all of their experience there, and certainly with some additional training around what it's like, and it's about the lexicon of language, I think, in many instances. It's not that it's any different in terms of what's being required to be delivered, it's just being able to use the right terminology and understanding some of the processes. So if a small company is prepared to put a very small amount of time and effort into those people, then the rewards that they will gain from having taken somebody on with that 50 plus sort of template is going to be huge.
So being able to,
much.
it's not just about finding the person who's the right fit, it's also giving them the skills so that they can fit well within the organization, they have something to offer. I'll just briefly mention in Europe, we can maybe talk about this in the questions and answers session, there was a compact, an agreement which was reached between EU level social partners on active aging, and one of the big elements of this was job change. In terms of some research that I'm doing with older migrants, we talked yesterday, there was some mention of communities of support for older people supporting one another. We found that with older migrants, there's often a process of co-construction of work which one another might value, that they can work together to support them. And then finally, in terms of technology can help in that process in a couple of ways as well. One is in terms of training, new forms of training, so that people don't have to start from the ground and work their way up. Often what older workers need is some top-up training to be complementary to the skills that they already have, giving them the ability to put their best foot forward when it comes to job interviews, intergenerational transfer of knowledge and capabilities, and we can maybe talk about that in the discussion. Not only do older workers have something to contribute to younger workers, but younger workers can support older workers in making that job transition. And then finally, having some communities of practice between older workers so that they can support one another in making jobs, in finding jobs which they value. And the last thing that I'll just mention here is an interview that I did some time ago with an American HR specialist, Carrie Hannon, in which she talked about the experience of one person we were talking about older veterans, and she mentioned a veteran that she had talked to had also left the military after 50, although in the United States, and found the dream job that he was always looking for. And I'll let her speak, say a little bit about that.
Don Covington was a career military Navy in the U.S. And when it came to time frames in his mid-50s, mandatory retirement, and Don could have done a lot of things. He could have flown commercial aircraft, he could have probably gone to work for the Defense Department, but Matthew, Don ran away with the service, okay? And I'm like, okay, seriously, Don, what does the military have to do with the circus? And he jokingly said, Carrie, they're very similar, the military and the circus. But I knew what he meant, and what he meant is through his whole career in the Navy, he had learned a lot of leadership skills and that sort of thing. And what Don did is he found a job. He had always been passionate about the circus since he was a little kid, so I'm not kidding about running away with the circus. And it was his passion, was the circus. And so when he took his retirement, he got a job at the Big Apple Circus as the company manager, moving a troupe of circus performers up and down the East Coast of the U.S. And his wife had been a nurse. She became the wardrobe manager. And here they had a wonderful opportunity to employ a lot of those, or as I like to say to Don, redeploy a lot of the skills that he had in the Navy to leading this troupe of circus performers. And it's just magic. He's like a kid.
So going from being an officer in the Army to running away with the circus. I think that's probably something that we all could think of as a wonderful way to develop a second career. And I guess the analogy would be the job market should always be a nice big tent. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Matt, for that talk. An excellent timekeeping.
Oh, thank you.
So now we're lucky to have Madonna Harrington-Meyer. So she is a professor of sociology at Syracuse University, and much of her recent work, I couldn't talk about all of it, but is on grandparenting and juggling work and grandparenting, and most recently it's grandparenting and food insecurity. So I'll just let Madonna.
Thank you, Anya. Yeah. Thank you, and thank you to Matt Flynn. Let's have another round of applause for Matt.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to start, is this on? Yes. Start by saying my daughter Ellen got mono when she was in 8th grade, and she was sick for more than 9 months. And during those 9 months, she took to watching a particular television show every afternoon. Yes, it was Judge Judy. Finally one day I said, "Why are you watching Judge Judy?" And she said, "I'm going to grow up to be Judge Judy." And I said, "Why do you want to grow up to be Judge Judy?" And she said, "Because I can tell people what to do, and they have to do it." So at lunch I met Matt Flynn's father, and after this I'd like to have a little chat with him about what it's like to raise a future Judge Judy. Okay, so I have one observation and 2 questions to raise following Matt's talk today. The first one is, I worry that the United States is way behind on this topic. We're certainly behind Japan. I'm worried that we're behind all of the EU. And I've heard some of Anya's work on this topic, and now some of your work on this topic, and I fear that we're behind. So let me just make my observation. We have a lot of sticks, but not so many carrots in the United States to encourage people to work longer. So the first thing I want to point out is in the US, you can have Social Security when you're 62. But you cannot have full benefits until you're 70. And if you take benefits at 62 as opposed to 70, they are 50% less for the rest of your life. So the penalty is enormous if you retire early. Secondly, Medicare, we don't have national health insurance or any of the programs you guys have. You get your insurance through your job in the United States, and if you don't have a job, it's hard to have insurance. You cannot have Medicare until you're 65 unless you have a disability. And so those are both things that sort of force people to stay in the labor force perhaps longer than they would want to. Now we know that working longer and later is good for us. It's good for our physical health, it's good for our emotional well-being, it's good for our finances, it's good for our social well-being. A lot of our social life comes through our work life. We know that it can be very, very good for us, unless, and there's a big unless it's the job that's making you sick. So in interviewing all these grandparents over this last bunch of years, I'm talking to so many people with disabilities that they got on their jobs. So a carer, somebody who was lifting a patient, the patient fell on her. She now has severe, severe injuries to her back, and in fact walks with a cane and has to use a wheelchair often. So people get hurt on the job. The National Association of Social Insurance in the United States says that more than 10 million Americans 50 and over have physically arduous jobs. And those numbers are growing, and they're not randomly distributed. Being a professor is easy on your body. Being a shingler on the roof is a very hard job for your body. And people who are more likely to have these physically arduous jobs are lower SES, blacks and Hispanics, increasingly female, and often they have significant health problems themselves. Often they have disabilities acquired on the job over the decades. And all of these things can make continuing and physically demanding work very problematic. All right, so that is my observation, that I'm very, very concerned for people who are in physically arduous jobs and for people with lower SES, lower options, fewer options. So I have 2 questions. The first one relates to an article by Cahill and Quinn. This is a 2020 article that I like. They looked at gradual retirement in the United States, and they said that there's basically 3 paths. The first one is bridge employment. So this is what we've mostly been talking about. Bridge employment, they say, is with a different employer. You quit your job and you go to a different employer, And you can switch from full-time down to part-time. And they say that 50% of older men and women in full-time jobs in the United States do a bridge job on their way out the door. So they retire, but they retire into a bridge job. The second group are the people who retire completely, and then after a little while, they re-enter the labor force. This is by far the riskiest path, because once you're out of the labor force, it can be very difficult to get back in, particularly if you're in one of those groups that I just mentioned. So 3 million Americans left the labor force early during COVID, partly because they were worried about COVID and partly because their stock market holdings looked good, and then the stock market plummeted. And now a lot of those 3 million people are trying to get back into the labor force, and they're having a hard time. So the third category that they talk about is the least popular one, but I'm trying to figure out why. So here's my first question. The least prevalent way to leave is to have phased retirement, to keep your current employer and just bring it down, dial it down, go from teaching 4 classes to 2 classes, go from doing this much of a workload to this much of a workload. In the United States, only about 10% of older workers do this. Why is this so uncommon, and is it way more common in the EU? Are you doing a better job of helping people with this path? So we'll come back to this, but why are we so bad at it? That's my first question. This seems like the least risky path for a lot of people. It's such an obvious path. You would be able to keep your income, often your benefits, you know where you're going. You've already got an employer who respects you and values you. Why aren't we using this, this bridge out the door more successfully? And then my second question, there's an article by Dingeman. This is about the Dutch people leaving their work. And they say that 1 in 4 of their people leave work to a bridge job, but that about 7% of all retirees who want a bridge job can't get one. Who has the most trouble getting a bridge job? The exact same people I was worried about at the beginning of this. So you're more likely to have trouble getting a bridge job if you're lower SES, if you're an older retiree, if you have poor health or any kind of a disability, and if you're a person of color, if you're Black or Hispanic, and sometimes if you're a woman. So my worry here then is these people who need bridge jobs the most are the least likely to be able to get them. How can we focus more on making sure that those people get a bridge job? So when I was getting ready for this, I just Googled bridge job. I don't know what I was thinking. And I got a thing back, and it said 50,000 bridge jobs. And I thought, oh, fantastic. Look at America. We're way out ahead. 50,000 bridge jobs. Then I started to read them. Concrete pourer, rebar layer, heavy equipment operator. They literally meant bridge jobs, like making bridges. So, okay, that's where we're at on bridge jobs.
They're all in Maryland.
Yeah, that's right. All right, so let me just open it up for questions. And we'll take over.
Okay, thanks so much, Madonna. Yeah, so has anybody got any questions? Microphone's here for anyone else. There, up at the back there.
Yeah, I had a question for Dr. Flynn. You said 28% of those adults want to return to work. Did you discover why they want to go back to work? Was it mostly like financially motivated, or?
So these figure that figure was from the labor force survey, the UK labor force survey. They ask firstly that they ask about their job status, those who are unemployed, plus those who consider themselves economically inactive, and then they have a choice of different reasons why they, both the reasons for the inactivity, so is it health-related, short-term, long-term health-related, is it because of a redundancy or caring responsibilities, and then there's the second part of that, would they like to work or not, and that 28% was 28% of the inactive, and the reason, and whether they wanted to work or not. Just from the interviews that I've had, I find that there's a variety of reasons. As Madonna mentioned, one of the big reasons is because one might have retired before they were really ready to do so, or they were pushed out. COVID is certainly one of the reasons for this. Getting a retirement offer, an early retirement offer, and thinking about the figures of how much will I get for that early retirement without the next step. A lot of organizations also offer some career support for somebody who's leaving for redundancy or early retirement reason, but they might not really know what the next step was. Just to mention the question of why is it that America seems to be in a different pattern than Europe. In Europe, it's obviously a much more structured labor market. Collective agreements play a major role in this. You talk to older workers in places like Germany, and they say, well, there are no opportunities to stay and work longer, because if I stay and work longer, they're going to still take my national insurance, and I won't get a better pension, and there are very few opportunities for people staying beyond retirement age. And whereas in America, you can have a side gig and you can do many other things sort of under the radar. I suspect that the U.S. figures are probably a little bit lower because a lot of the phased retirement options are going under the radar, and they could be going under the radar for both positive and negative reasons. Could be positive in the sense that somebody's got a side gig, something that they might not necessarily be telling their employer, and then once they go into full retirement, they can make that into a full career. I've talked to some older workers who have that experience. I was doing this side thing for a while, and it really took off, and this is when I fully retired. It could be negative in the sense that somebody becomes a consultant, but they're being the consultant with only one organization, and that's the employer that they had before, who's offering work in much worse conditions of service, a lot less job security, and a lot lower pay. So I think one thing that seems to be doing, they seem to be doing well on the continent, not necessarily in the UK. In the UK, phased retirement options seem to be governed by job demand of organizations. Organizations that need people will find a way to get the people, and that might be keeping their older workers on a little bit longer. We abolished mandatory retirement in 2010, but between 2007 and 2010, employers could keep their retirement ages, but they had to have conversations with people who were 65 and wanted to stay longer. And the vast majority of employers who had a request for phased retirement offered something, because usually if you've had somebody up until the age of 65, you probably like them enough that you're going to let them stay a little bit longer. In Europe, there are restricted opportunities to work beyond retirement age, but you do have some collective agreements between unions and employers to create ways in which an older worker can stay and work, but maybe do something a little bit different. So training somebody. In Italy, they have something called intergenerational relay systems, where it's a very fancy title, but basically what it means is that an older worker who wants to phase out of into retirement can maybe spend the last couple of years training a younger person to take on the job afterwards. But it's in a much more structured, much more coordinated way. So in part to deal with some of the inequalities that you talked about before, that it isn't just offered to the person with the loudest voice, the person who is banging their fist on their boss's table, to ask for something, but it's offered to everybody as a universal offer. And I think that's probably, I think we both agree that's probably a more equal approach to this issue. Yeah.
So do we have any other questions?
And if you want to talk to somebody who's made a number of midlife career transitions, then you can talk to my dad, who's in the back there, who the last time he was in a session like this, I introduced him and I said, he's such a wonderful person. If anybody'd like him, he's for sale. Because not because I'm being ageist, but because he used to say that about me when I was young. But I didn't say that this time because I'm just too gracious.
Intergenerational reciprocity.
Yes, intergenerational reciprocity, not conflict.
Yeah, we have a question up there.
Thanks so much for the presentation. So a couple of questions. One is thinking about the basic income idea and AI. So in thinking about the future of work, just a general idea that, to what extent are we looking at a future where fewer people work, basic income becomes a bigger sort of idea, and what are the implications then for what, especially older adulthood looks like in such an era?
Yeah.
So basic income and AI.
Yeah. The idea of a universal basic income is quite a good one, because we usually think about that in terms of younger people, somebody who's just left university. They don't want to go into the first job which is available for them. They might want further education, and therefore a universal basic income can help with that, because they don't feel that they have to get into a new job as soon as possible in order to start paying off their student loans, because they could be in the same situation as the veterans that I talked about before. They start at the bottom of the job ladder, and they think that they can work their way up, but they might not work their way up to what they really want to do. But it could apply to older workers as well. That's why I mentioned the idea of the support which is already available to veterans. And the UK is actually doing really well in this, where you've got this whole infrastructure in place of career support, top-up training, a career advisor, employers that are positive towards older veterans, and veterans themselves in the organizations to help them make that transition. Because if you're going from the military to civilian job, that's a completely, it's a new game. It's like going from playing poker to playing three-dimensional chess, or vice versa. And if you can help somebody make that transition, then so much the better. Well, if you can offer it to veterans, because veterans have served their country, veterans have great skills. Those skills aren't apparent to others, but they're transferable. Why can't you offer it to fire service? Fire service also provide a good public service. They also have transferable skills, and they're also pushed out of work after 50. So if you can offer it to fire service, why can't you offer it to teachers? And if you can offer it to teachers, why can't you offer it to others? Professors are going to be very low down the list. They're going to be the last ones, because as we mentioned, they need the least help, and sometimes they can be maybe the least useful to organizations. But nevertheless, we've got a whole list of people who might need that support. Not only do they need the support, but it could help the economy as a whole if they better support it. So basic income could be one way to give people that cushion so that they can make the job change. But you could also have an infrastructure in place so that they have the resources, the commodities that they need in order to make that job change too.
I guess part of where I was going with it was imagining a world where people don't have to work as much. Because of AI, so in other words, as increasing numbers of jobs become mechanized or run by robots, that there simply won't be as much need for people to work as much. And so to that extent, I'm just wondering, because I guess part of the sort of underlying assumption here is that people want to work. And so what are the opportunities? I'm trying to imagine a world where people don't have to work, or simply that there are not jobs there because of AI. And so that's kind of where I'm going with the basic income. Is a world where not as much work is needed. That's what.
Well, it could be less work. It could also be work which people find more meaningful as well. I've done some work. You've done some work as well with care. People in the care sector, and a lot of the reason that people go into care as a profession is because they want to help others and they want to get a sense of satisfaction that they've made the world better for a vulnerable person. The problem with care work is you don't always get that, because a lot of the time that you're spending is doing things that are physically demanding, doing a lot of paperwork. You might have a person that you're caring for that you don't have very good communication with, or you don't have good communication with the family. and therefore you get disillusioned in the job because the meaning that you wanted to get from it is no longer there. Technology can help with that. It can make it easier to communicate with one another. You can have robots or other assistive equipment, which is taking the physical demands of the job, and the care worker can spend more time doing the thing that really gives them meaning. Now, not everybody might be in that situation, but you might have a future in which technology it's not taking away the job, it's taking away the parts of the job that people don't want to do. So it gives them more space and more time to find work which is meaningful for them.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, well, I'll just thanks once again to Matt and Madonna for 2 excellent talks, and I'm sure they've stimulated a lot of questions, and you can continue out during the break. Okay, thanks very much.
Great, thank you.